Right. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to the organisers of ALED for inviting me here. ALED I see as a very important organisation for the study of discourse analysis, and Argentina is a place I've been really wanting to come to for many years, so I'm delighted to be here with you. I'll begin with the issue of language. There's the languages of the nations of Latin America are Spanish and Portuguese, and the perceptive among you will notice I'm speaking in English, so I need to apologise and explain, or explain, not apologise. I do read Spanish moderately well by now. All my materials will be used in, will be based on Spanish language. However, on another occasion, at another ALED, I tried to present in Spanish, and good friends took me aside and said, "It was a disaster, Bob." Great symbol, but extremely painful. So I've taken their advice, and I want to especially thank Professor Julian Esquerra for the running translation he's provided, and all the other assistants. He is just simply a marvellous man. I cannot thank you enough. A wonderful symbol to me of the incredible abilities of Latin American scholars in every country of America. I sincerely mean that. You are amazing. And so are many other Latin American scholars. Right. I'll address the issue, the topic of the social construction of reality, which is a long-standing theme in critical discourse analysis. I'm wanting to take this example of a construction of Latin America, a map of Latin America now, and I want to make the point that the construction of reality of this kind is always multimodal. And even maps, which seem as though they're transparent representations of reality, are not so. For instance, I could, at the press of a finger, invert the map, and we suddenly see how potent is the signifier of top-bottom. I've created a world in which Argentina is on top, dominating all the others, Mexico crowded in the bottom, and do you know what is underneath there? It is the United States of America. So I'll return to this other construction of Latin America. The second point I want to make is this map was published by a man called Andrew Clare, and it colours in the different countries. And obviously, if you go to Brazil, you will not find a continuous landscape of yellow. Again, it's constructed. We don't even notice how these things happen. It's constructed yellow, so is Mexico, because the code says there are serious tensions in the both. Actually, to have serious tensions is a very good thing as far as Andrew Clare is concerned. All the rest get worse and worse. So the point is that Andrew Clare takes this map produced by others. He inscribes on it through two codes, colour and words, a sweeping judgment on Latin America designed for gringos not to invest in Latin America. So this is showing the unobtrusive effectivity of a multimodal, multi-voice construction of Latin America. I now want to come at this issue of location from another angle and look at one particular theme, the theme that yeah, I've jumped over a number of things. Gonna keep jumping. Right, yeah. Right. Yes, we'll keep going. I won't try and backtrack over what I was going to say, but the point I'm wanting to move on to is to look at both. Thank you. I was trying to sort of censor this man here. Moving on to the point about Latin America. First of all, in the part that I didn't talk to, I was going to say that the construction of Latin America as such is relatively weak because the construction of Latin America is in the hands of people who construct it. And in Marxist terms, you can make the distinction between constructions for a class and constructions of a class. And the distinction is between material relations which act whether you know about them or not, as against consciousness. And I would make the claim that Latin American consciousness as such is not strong. Most people in Latin America are more likely to identify with their nation than with the regional identification, even though the category Latin America seems to be higher, is not so active. And that's the general point about these scales, that they are not a theoretically given once for all object, they're continuously constructed. And Latin America is not currently strongly constructed from inside except on specific occasions. And that variability of it, the construction of Latin America being in the hands of those who construct it, which include forces from outside, like Andrew Clare, constructing it as a dangerous place which is poor for investment, as against occasional mentions of Latin America within Latin American countries, more positive. I'm going to take just one angle on the idea that construction of Latin America as an object, as a resource, as against construction of it for Latin Americans, can be illustrated with three biographies. The first one is Paulo Freire, and the second one is Ariel Dorfman and Armand Matelat. These two writers wrote well before Arled was dreamt of, So they're not discourse analysts, they weren't even trying to be discourse analysts. I'm treating them as in the line that led to the kind of thing which is done in our land. And I'm asking the question, is there any pattern coming from being in Latin America, in nations of Latin America, which was actually productive as against, as is often seen, just a reason for being backward. Because I think all these two figures, or these three writers, are all very important. And I think if you look at their trajectory, Freire started in Brazil, kicked out of Brazil, exiled in Bolivia, then Chile, United States and Switzerland. And with each move, his star rose. And so when he returned from Switzerland, finally welcomed back into Brazil, his journey through the different levels of globalisation lent him huge power and authority, which he still has. So he's a really major figure, and he didn't get that from being in Switzerland. He needed to go through that Latin American journey, that typical Latin American journey involving exile, in order to achieve the importance of his theories of critical pedagogy, which I would suggest are a very useful framework for the whole critical discourse analysis project. It's different in its origins, but I think it should be reunited with it. In the case of Dorfman and Mattelart, they came from different locations. Mattelart from Belgium. They converged on Chile in a golden moment for Chile just before the coup, where they published this. After the coup, they had to go their separate ways. So again, the idea of Latin America as a location of typical events like this, which still in this case were very productive, because Dorfman and Mattelart were able to construct a North America reading Latin America, two objects which neither of which was obvious to people who had not gone through that journey. I now want to look more closely at Eliseo Veron. He's an Argentinian who died in April last year, so I'd like to take the opportunity to honour him on this occasion at this event in his native city. So I'm glad that we're connected again. Veron is not as famous or engaged a theorist as the other two, but he is a more serious theorist of social semiotics and discourse, who is not well known in the Anglo world. And one of my points is that he ought to be. He's very interesting, and he partly suffers from what could be seen as a Latin American curse, his works not entering into discourse in the same way as Mattelart, Dorfman and Freire. And so, yes, there are problems with the visibility of theory, good theory produced from Latin America. Well, I'd like to make 6 observations on implications of these theorists. Next one, 6 observations. Just looking at it from two supranational global levels, including Latin America and Europe and USA in the global systems, were relevant to all four, but in unpredictably different ways. So I'm saying that multiscalar analysis is a very valuable perspective, but it's not something which is a once-for-all template you impose on us. It's not the case that a multiscalar analysis comes up with the same conclusions about everyone. On the contrary, it sees how the different locations can be either productive or can have problems. So individuals have different. Next one. Individuals have different trajectories across all scales, affected but not determined by forces at all levels, moving across boundaries which are porous between levels. And the point about the porosity between levels is a very important point. Most such theories I should be talking about the theories of transparency. Yeah. Yes. My theory of bodies is that they're actually not transparent. They're material, they always matter. But getting back to my theme, porosity of boundaries, the idea that boundaries in scalar structures or anywhere else are fixed, given, static, is an extremely misleading form for models. They're always fluid, they're always changeable, provisional. An analysis needs to be able to be seeing how these exchanges happen. So, 3, common aspects and differences of language, including the Latin of Latin America, the two languages play a role, but it's not decisive in both respects, in that all of these authors needed to be bilingual. So without real effective bilingualism, yes, the boundaries around groups created by languages are very hard to pass. There have to be linguistic strategies, translation or whatever, but my point is that once you have these strategies, then there's not a problem. There's not a Wolffian problem that there's not a Wolffian problem that Spanish, say, is so unique to Spanish speakers that no one outside the Spanish language could understand it, how they try to learn, and vice versa. Spanish speakers will never understand English well enough. I think that's completely wrong. I think many Latin American speakers can come with whatever Spanish they have and see things in English text that many native English speakers can't. So, well, I'll move on to 4. The national level is the most powerful level of forces. So in a multiscalar structure, you don't have this even ladders enclosed in a level. Some levels are much more determining than others. In the case of national structures, the national structure is determining, but within the national structure, even more determining is something like Marxist class analysis. So it's not that, as some people say, that with the coming of globalisation, Marxist class analysis is no longer relevant. On the contrary, it's more difficult to apply, but it's still, the level of class struggle is still, as Marx said, the primary level of determination of social and cultural struggles. Right, next one. No, I'll jump over those and move to Veron's theory of social semiotics. I won't go into much detail in this. I'll just sort of leave it there for you to read. But I think his formulations of key points of social, what he called it, social semiotics, included discourse analysis, they're beautifully precise and elegant, and they're worth looking at because he was such a good theorist. But I won't, I haven't got time to continue with that. I now want to look at a metaphor. Veron, I probably need to see one thing. The last point by Veron, se obtienen dos lecturas, that one. He describes an image of polarized glass. You know, the kind of image where you look at it from one side and it's the Virgin, and from the other side it's Christ or something. A single text finally can be either one or other, and if you're standing in front of it, it's confused between the two. And he was struck by this and reflected on it along these lines. It's a case where you get two different readings of the same text, and the frontal gaze, he says, can only be a cloudy and confused image. Well, that's the case with that illusion, but if you look at Wittgenstein's duck rabbit, do you know this image? It comes from Wittgenstein, who is, as of course you know, a philosopher, but really it comes from the psychology tradition of Gestalt psychology, and just sort of underlining one of the points that Toyin often makes, discourse analysis has got to take seriously insights from cognitive psychology, and this is one, even though it comes to us via a philosopher, Wittgenstein. So the illusion is, for some people this is a duck, and for other people it's a rabbit. And the point of the illusion is that for most people, they see only one and not the other. And they're sometimes surprised when, if they're sure that it's a duck, they say, rabbit, where's the rabbit? And then they look at it, and as they're looking at it, they see the rabbit, and they can't see why they thought it was a duck. Wittgenstein reflected on this, but I'll reflect on it first of all. this is a gestalt, a whole image around the duck, and so with that framing, you don't even think that it might be a rabbit. However, if you look at it as a rabbit, it's framed in a different way. So the duck and rabbit are two different gestalts, which it seems to be a deep property of the mind to restore each image to a whole, to the whole that is suggested by the details. Right, I'll just say a few things. Right.
I was just trying to form.
Yes. So a pato, a coneco, and for this lecture I have coined the new word patoneco, which describes a duck-rabbit so fused you don't know whether it is a duck or a rabbit. And so I'll be using patoneco for the rest of this lecture as a new technical term. I'm happy for you to use it wherever it's useful. So, patoneco, it's a great word. Applying this to social semiotics, it turns out that there are some important oppositions which can be well understood as patoconeco or patoneco phenomena. And I think that's many of these oppositions are ones that have proved problematic for discourse analysis and social semiotics. It seems so obvious that one of these opposites is true, and it's hard. Well, people can assert that the other is also true, but they often find it very hard to do so. In the case of the patoneco, Veron distinguishes the property of text. Yep. Right. Yeah. So some applications of its principle. First of all, in Veron himself, he distinguishes between the properties of text, syntaxis e semantica, and he distinguishes these from los sujetos hablantes utilizan en el plano pretendiamente pragmático. Basically, what he's saying there is that textual analysis and social analysis are difficult to put together. I'm saying, yes, they are. They're surprisingly difficult. It should be easy to go from one to the other. It isn't. I suggest that the patoneco principle explains why this is. You look at the complex multi-level processes whereby textuality and social processes interchange, and you can make sense of them by seeing the textual as an area of coherence or the social as an area of coherence, but it's very difficult, except by a Wittgensteinian dialectic, to put them together. And so there's a kind of epistemological problem in doing the work which social semiotics and critical discourse analysis say everyone ought to do. I think when we say that, we ought to realise that we are asking something much more difficult than we realise, something which we ourselves will find difficult to do. And so within that, the pair syntaxis semantica has also proved surprisingly problematic. So Chomsky famously distinguished syntax absolutely from semantics. and many theorists say that's completely wrong. I say it's completely wrong. However, I would need to say that Chomsky's move, which is just saying there are no ducks, there are only rabbits, or vice versa, he resolves the ambiguity by insisting that there's only one, and he's actually basing that on a property of a mind. It is very hard to move between syntax and semantics. And as we urge people to do it, we ought to realise it's very hard. Our mind resists doing it. And finally, the problem of levels, the theme of my lecture. In sociology, there's macro sociology, micro sociology, and there's a tendency for the two not to connect. Obviously they must be connected. The pattern echo principle says that it is actually harder than you would think to connect macro and micro. You can only do that with a very systematic multiscalar strategy. Otherwise, you will be closing around the micro or closing around the macro, unable to connect them in a strategic way. Yes, now I see the same principle operating in what Gunther and I called the ideological complex, which is a collection of contradictory versions of world which are functionally related, imposed coercively by one social group on another in the name of our own distinct interests, or offered subversely by another social group with the intent of resisting in its own interests. This idea, which Gunther and I proposed back in 1988, to us was a necessary correction of most ideological analysis of a time, which continues to be ideological analysis now. The assumption that ideology is all the plot by the bastards to impose their rule in a single coherent image. Our proposition says that no, coherence is never the property of ideology. Ideology normally comes as contradictions, and those contradictions may flip between each other bewilderingly in a patho-koneko structure. So the way ideology works is built into this property of the mind explored by Gestalt psychology, I'll just see. Am I going? But yeah, I'll just quickly go to CDA, social semiotics after Veron. Yeah, right, yes. To contribute to the business of this conference, I want to suggest a version of these practices, CDA, social semiotics, and bring them into relation to Veron to stress the importance of this thinker, Veron, in identifying some of the key problems and ways out for this enterprise. So first of all, the relation with linguistics. Veron Well, the relation of linguistics to CDA is a very vexed one. And it's probably a product of Pataneco problems. Veron solved the problem of the relationship between linguistics and social semiotics by not really knowing much about linguistics. And that's probably a good idea. but actually it's too easy. But he didn't know about the so-called linguistics wars. And if he had, he would have had very good reasons for ignoring linguistics, because it's not what is the relationship between CDA, social semiotics, and linguistics, but what linguistics do we choose to have this relationship. And so I'll just be making the assertion that to accept the division of linguistics into the various warring schools is to capitulate. The reality of linguistics is it must be total linguistics. It must be drawing together the current approaches to the study of its object and the differences which are made so problematic always for social reasons, always for the greater power of the people running this school or that. They just need to be ignored. Total linguistics need to be returned, and total linguistics is better than Veron's solution of no linguistics. But so no linguistics was a regrettable necessity at that time. I'll jump to four. Right. One of the things which is really useful in Veron, which I'll be stressing in this, is his emphasis on sentidos, significados. It's surprising, and it's probably a Pataneco phenomenon. It's surprising that even people who say how important meaning is marginalise it. And I don't normally say anything critical of the great linguist Michael Halliday, but it's true even of Michael Halliday. He cannot cope with meaning in his theory of language. And it's a theory of language which doesn't have meaning as central, is just simply fundamentally structurally inadequate. Veron's proposition that whatever you do, you put meaning at the centre, meaning making at the centre, alongside social processes, I think is the essential refounding of our whole area. Finally, meaning five. Meanings are expressed by many media and modalities. Veron did not know about multimodal theory, which Günter Kress has so eloquently introduced to us in this conference. He ought to have. That's part of a fundamental semiotic revolution in CDA. And I think the question is not whether we should still wonder whether we need to look at outside words. Of course we include outside words. We also need to recognise that it will be a Pataneco problem. That putting words, which are a well-known duck for us all, putting them in conjunction in the same field of forces as a whole array of images is going to be cognitively difficult. But even if it's cognitively difficult, you've just got to do it, because that's how meaning, social meaning works. Veron recognised the importance of multiscalar meaning. So Right. Multiscalar analysis in society and language. I would make the sort of strong proposition that globalization has forced on the world a new understanding of the complexity and scale of multiscalar activities. And all analysts of a social just simply, so critical discourse analysis just simply has to get up to date with theories of globalization, because that's what determines the world we live in. When we look at it, we find that yes, there's always multiscalar levels and so on. So we can incorporate some of the things that we did. But theories of globalization are a laboratory in which we have discovered how multiscalar phenomena really work. So, sorry, 7.
Wallerstein.
No, the before globalization, multiscalar. Oh, well, anyway, we'll jump to Wallerstein, right? Wallerstein, yes. I'm going to use the theories of Wallerstein, which came from Marxism as a sort of rethinking of globalization in a Marxist framework, and he went back in time, to at least 500 years ago. He included the colonial history as an intrinsic part of the creation of a modern globalization world. Most other theorists of globalization treat globalization as something which has just suddenly happened, that's so new we can't understand it. All we can do is just pay good money to the multinational corporations who seem to know what multiscalar reality is. And of course, that's nonsense. The multinational corporations and theorists of globalization who see their self-claims as the reality are seriously misled.
6 points.
What's that?
6 points.
6.
You have 6 points on it, and then go through.
Oh, right, yes. Yeah, so I'll jump to some comments on the model. First of all, the relation between nuclear and periphery is one of domination. That's obviously familiar to you. But an important further point is that in a system, every whole changes the nature of each part. And this is a fundamental proposition which is well known in language. It's equally true in systems theory. In systems theory, I think I'm running out of time, so I'll jump over the. Can you just click through those?
Sure.
Yes.
You tell me where you are.
Can you?
Just do whatever you need.
Right. If you could just slowly click through them. I think one of the. I'll just look at the theory of systems, and one of the things I'll say about the theory of systems is I've got a dotted line between peripheria A, B and C. One of the consequences of a core-periphery model is that relations between peripheral nations are inhibited. And so the fragmentation of Latin America is just one of many illustrations of how rulers in a core-periphery model weaken the opposition. The second point is that the principle which constitutes the system as a whole is replicated at different levels, so that within an individual nation in this core-periphery model, a dominant elite had the same functional role as the core powers internationally and so on, and that principle continues on down the scale. And finally, the last point, ideologia. A system like this has to be held together by ideology. In the case of Latin America, and I'm moving towards my example, the ideology which held Latin America together was, of course, the Catholic Church. It was the ideological agent of imperialism, as no one doubts. Quickly looking now at multiscalar theories of language. I'm going to have to be fairly quick, but what I'm showing here is well-known tree diagrams. And so William Jones's tree diagram of Indo-European, which mirrors, of course, Darwin's Origin of a Species, Jakobson's phonological system, and Chomsky's syntactic structures. All of them have the same form, a tree diagram. And I'm suggesting that this is a universal which goes beyond linguistics. Tree diagrams have a hugely explanatory value in both in language, society, and many other spheres. So I'll just quickly move to the idea of fractals of Mandelbrot. This is an image of crystals of ice which look like ferns. This beautiful theory shows the homology between forms in nature, in society, in language, as in inanimate nature. So it's a very powerful, very interesting theory. Even though I have problems with the particular form of Chomsky's theory of universals, theories of universals, I think, are very good, if very powerful and dangerous things. So I'm going to be proposing a theory of fractals. Fractals are self-similar patterns across different levels, and so the idea of fractality is intrinsically or a strategy for relating scales. Right. I now want to jump to my example, or I won't be able to do justice to it. The Pope in Latin America. First of all, I came here proposing to look at Latin America and the constructions of Latin America as a concept, but following Veron, I wanted to see it embedded in an event, because an event is the unit of analysis. The event is a unit of analysis. The category of Latin America doesn't make sense except as it is constructed by individual players in particular occasions. I'm going to be jumping fairly quickly. Looking at Latin America, and looking at this, one of the things I'm saying is that CDA needs to be able to look at very high levels, massive levels of text. It needs to take on board huge corpuses, huge corpora, as well as huge themes. But it's not the case that you need a huge corpus to look at a huge theme. Multiscalar analysis looks at the two and strategically mixes and matches. So it's the case, for instance, that if you look at the large scale, Google's English database had 1,980,000 items for Pope Francis's visit to Latin America. So that's a big corpus, but the trouble is that in that corpus, social specificity is lost, so you don't quite know who is constructing that, what social relationships it's representing. So it's not meaningless, but with the same database, there's 339,000 entries for Pope Benedict's visit to Latin America. I think the difference is so marked that it's meaningful for what you could call the English-speaking world. But for fine-tuning, you need to go somewhere else. And so what I'm suggesting is the value of a fractal analysis. To take a very small amount of text, a single sentence, the sentence of an event, and this is something which is easy to look for, sentences which describe more or less the event you're interested in. And so that's very small scale in text, large scale in terms of your objective analysis, but that is a powerful strategy. In fact, it's so important for political communication to be able to sum up event structures, everything in a small space of words. Well before tweet was invented, there have been many forms of text which encapsulates events. Toyn van Dijk has talked of global meaning, statements of global meanings as a strategy. I think it's a very good idea. Right, I'm going to be looking at just this, and one of the merits of looking at a single sentence is that you can then subject it to a rigorous analysis. So long as you do it in a multiscalar analysis, you're not losing sight of the wider corpus. What you're doing is giving yourself a way in to see the relevant structures in that wider corpus. So in this case we've got the author. You always start with the author, which in this case is Carlos Martinez Garcia in La Jornada, which is a left-wing Mexican paper. And he gives this sentence reflecting on the categories of the author. You can already see the shape of a corpus. So what categories make sense of La Jornada. One is that it's a left-wing daily print, and those would be 3 categories in your corpus in Mexico. And so a Spanish language in Mexico. And so you can design a corpus, which I did in an informal way, just from reflecting on the implicit categories of the of that first sentence. And similar things happen with analysing the sentence itself. Syntactic analysis sees how the oration, the sentence, actually brings together 3 elements. And you need a corpus on each of those 3 elements. Papa Francisco, the Visita, America Latina. I'm treating the next clause as an expansion of the theme of that one, and just looking at El Papa Francisco as a paradigmatic structure. You don't need to look at very many examples before you find that there's a very limited corpus of items that this man can be called. He can be called Jorge, what's his name? Jorge Bergoglio. Jorge Bergoglio. He can be called anything between the extremes of his personal name before he is Pope. In between, he can be either the Argentinian Pope or the Latin American Pope. Or at the other extreme, he could be Su Santidad. So the paradigm is organised by social categories. Every choice makes social sense, and so simultaneously, as you're building the corpus, you're analysing it, because the corpus follows the tracks of meaningful categories. So the incorporation of meaning and grammar is actually fundamental to effective analysis. I now need to I won't have time to do justice to this. The Cyber Pope tweeting, and there's a number of other things that the Pope did, which was using modern message systems in which he comes as an individual multiplied many times over by technology. So he becomes a peculiar kind of individual, a mass-produced individual, and that's part of the social construction of a Pope. Then various new technologies enabled him to do that. This is an iconic image of the Pope. I've given the red, you can't see it very well, a red circle around the Pope, a blue circle around the reception, and I'm suggesting that this is another Papaneco. Sorry, I'll be blasted by Papaneco, right? You don't joke about the Pope, right? You can analyse the image, the structure of that image, to see the intersection in it of two worlds of discourse, two worlds of meaning, and in this he is shown as dangerously surrounded by the other. So the boundary between his Pato or Neko is invaded all the time by the alien world. I now look at one incident which happened. The Pope had to change his robes quickly, and he made use of a nearby Burger King. But in this image, you see, I've got three circles. I've got the circle of the Pope, the religious one. It's almost distinct, but it's invaded by the next circle, which is the brutality of the military power, which is necessary to protect him from the real threats. So a religious circle, a military circle, and finally the commercial circle. But not organised well. But in the next image below, we have the appropriation of the Pope by Burger King into its own discourse. So there's none of the problems of coherence of that top left-hand corner. They are in control of a seamless ideological structure. My conclusion. I want to return to the theme raised by Gunther in his lecture, the very provocative theme of do we need criticism? And if so, why and how? And reflecting on this, I read in Pagina 12, this man Sada writing as above, en el momento de auge los enfrentamientos políticos, etc. You can read that better than I can pronounce it. The phrasing is reminiscent of a famous passage by Marx. So this is going back to a Marxist origins, and he's saying, we really need, in Latin America, we really need a vigorous criticism. But returning to the questions that Gunther's made us think about, I connect this with what I've been showing about the Pope. And I ask myself, do we need a critical discourse analysis which takes apart this Pope, shows that behind everything there's just the same motives of power. He's no better, he's no worse than Macri or Soli or in Mexico Peña critical discourse analysis, if it can only be critical, is in danger of reducing everyone to the same level. Whereas it seems to me, and this is just what I feel, it seems to me that this Pope represents an opportunity which may be illusory, but it's an opportunity. And what does analysis need to be able to see opportunities and seize them and support them? It certainly needs a form of analysis which can go beyond criticism, can do very different things to criticism. And so that I see as an important task for discourse analysis, complementary positive forms of discourse analysis, not forgetting about the struggle which, as Sada says, it's just as bad today as ever. It's not that the struggle has become irrelevant, it's just that what we need to do in that struggle has become different. And so you are the ones who are going to do it, so I thank you for your attention. And I also thank Julian very much for his incredible job in the translation and following me. Thank you.